Lovers of lore, thank you for joining me for another installment of the Brothers' War story. In our previous installment, Mishra's war machine had just exploded, leaving Urza to wonder why his brother had created such an expensive ruse. Well, we get the answer the very next day at dawn, when the city of Krug is under siege. The attack happens right after Tanos sends out the last flight of ornithopters, and they're sent out looking for Urza because his entire squad had not reported back. And for the rest of Tanos' life, he would actually wonder if him sending off the ornithopters was the signal for Mishra's forces to attack, or if it was just a quirk of fate and timing. But regardless, the attack was incredibly successful. Mishra's forces had secretly gone around the city to each of the different beacon towers and slain the guards of those towers. As a result, when the dragon engines attacked, the city was left unawares, and Mishra had cunningly had the dragon engines hide inside the river Mardoon. So they rose up spectacularly out of the river and no beacons were set off. As a result, the city was absolutely in chaos. Tanos was doing what he could. He had found Kayla and rallied a bunch of the students, also getting automatons ready for the city's defense. In addition, he had gathered up all of the valuable notes and notebooks that Urza had and had sent them off with the smallest boy he could find in an ornithopter. That being done, he grabbed Ashnod's staff and they all headed out trying to escape out of the city. It didn't take long before they ran into a squad of Phology, which spelled disaster. But at the last moment, Ashnod stepped forward, pointed at the group, and said, "I give them my protection." There was a ripple of laughter that went through the troops, and the Kadir, who also happened to be part of the group, pointed out to Ashnod, "You don't actually have the ability to do that. You are not a Phology." And Ashnod tries to leverage the fact that she is Mishra's apprentice. But Kadir says, Mishra's never going to know this happened since you died here. And at that point, the Kadir's troops attack because his idea is he wants to make Mishra stronger and he thinks that Ashnod is essentially a crutch. So Tanos tosses Ashnod's staff over to her in the nick of time. She turns it on the soldiers, blasts them with magic. It lights up their nerves and they fall to the ground unconscious. Now the Kadir is not so lucky because Ashnod is a really vicious lady. So she starts amping up the magic on him to the point his head starts rocking and twisting on his neck with blood spurting out of his eyes and he collapses on the ground dead. After that, Ashnod was able to bluff their way through, but she was drained from all that magic use. After a few close calls, Ashnod managed to actually get Tanos and the others to the docks, at which point she departs from them. Now Urza, he didn't arrive at Krug until a full month afterwards. At this point, Mishra had been given the nickname the Butcher of Krug, and he had left only devastation. The city walls still stood, the gates had been torn down and melted, but everything within the city walls was crushed and burned. It had rained ash for a full 3 days. And the location of Urza's ornery, where he had his school, it had been scraped down to bedrock. Not even the rubble remained. There wasn't even dust. Urza learned from the survivors about the boy who had left in the ornithopter with the documentation. And that actually renewed the fire in Urza. There would be a reckoning. Now, unbeknownst to either of the brothers, there was a secret gathering happening far in the caves of Koilos. There were priests that considered the Thran holy. They came from faraway lands and had been laying low up until now. But dream visions of Phyrexia had pulled them in, and they had been called to the caves to work miracles. There were actually 24 of them. They had formed a brotherhood, the Brotherhood of Gix. The dreams that they had got stronger and more insistent as they got closer to the caves. And when they got there, the dreams guided them. It told them to take power stones and fit them in a particular pattern in the great machine. And they did so. touching the proper glyphs again laid out to them in their dreams. Lights sprung up and a portal appeared. And through that portal, a giant demon made of metal stepped through. And the Brotherhood of Gix fell to their knees in worship. "What may we call you, Lord?" they begged in unison. They received one word in response: Gix. So from here, the story moves forward a full year from Krug's destruction. Mishra has actually become the Kadir of the Philology now, considering the previous Kadir is no longer alive. Mishra has his encampment set up in Care Ridges. He's got foundries and forges, dozens of them. There's a giant barn, and Mishra's workshop was in a 60-foot high tree stump. It was piled with treasure everywhere, a tribute to Mishra's greatness. It also served as his throne room too. Mishra was keenly interested in books though, not treasure. He wanted knowledge of hydraulics, metallurgy, and things of that nature. He was also interested in seizing mines for resources, but he was fearful of Urza's reprisal. One of the construct Urza had designed, specifically Urza's Avenger, had damaged one of his dragon engines, and it was slowly dying. Mishra had kept this secret from almost everyone, but he was letting Ashnod in on this secret as he was trying to make a new dragon engine. But it was crude. The original dragon engine from Phyrexia was a thing of sleek beauty. This was a monstrosity of lapped, hammered plates. Mishra was adamant that they couldn't let anyone know that the dragon engines could be defeated. And the dragon engine that Mishra was making did have a similar power level to the other dragon engine, but none of the life. Now, Ashnod actually capitalized on this moment. She explained to Mishra, "I know a way that I can merge metal and life together." And Mishra asked what she would need. She explained she would need a private laboratory away from prying eyes, workers, materials, and people that won't be missed. Mishra looked at her and asked if criminals would be okay. What these two are up to is really vicious, honestly. Like, Mishra is not being a good person here, and Ashnod never was a good person. Ashnod's very happy with this development. The story jumps forward again 2 years into the future. Now Urza has a tower, and it's hidden in the mist, away from towns and cities. He has a large trove of power stones, and he's built a huge number of Yoshin soldiers. After a bunch of searching, Tanos is actually able to figure out where Urza is located and brings Kayla and Urza's son Harbin to meet him. Once they have reacquainted themselves, then Tanos requests to become Urza's apprentice again. But Urza rebuffs him and says, "You've proven you are a master artificer." And the reason he says this is during those 2 years, Tanos had actually developed a new type of construct made out of clay. They weren't quite as strong as metal constructs, but they had the incredible ability that they could heal themselves. So after Tanos is elevated to being a master artificer, then Urza has an awkward but heartfelt reunion with Kayla and meets his son, who asks, "Are you my father?" And he looks down at his child kindly and says, "I suppose I am. Very pleased to meet you." Now over in the caves of Koilos, Gix had been busy. He'd been looking for the thief, which is how he referred to Mishra. He was very displeased that his dragon engines had been taken, and he was using the Brotherhood of Gix to spy on the world. His way of extracting the information from the brothers is pretty gruesome. He drives his talons into their skull. This is a process that immediately wiped out the weakest of the Brotherhood. And it's a crazy experience for Gix because he feeds on the sensations of these beings, but he's used to Phyrexia, where everything is orderly, and these beings are absolute chaos. So it took a lot of figuring out what part of their minds he could erase, and what parts, if he erased them, would turn them into jabbering dolls that were of no use. But either way, for the priests, this is like a religious experience, while Gix's claws are driven into their brains. It's also how he feeds them information. So through this network of agents, he becomes aware of Urza and learns that he's the one who held the other half of the Power Stone. Gix can actually feel the Power Stone halves calling out to him, radiating power and demanding that he take them back to Phyrexia. And so originally, he was just here to punish Mishra and get his dragon engines back. But now he had other plans. So he sends the Brotherhood of Gix to infiltrate the camp of both brothers. Back at the Philology camp, people have started to think that Ashnod might be a demon. The people that are sent to her camp never return. And a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of people, have been sent to her camp never to be seen again. One advantage is it worked well for loyalty in the camp, but her practices were eating up a ton of resources. The mines were running out. And after years and months, Ashnod finally had a working prototype, a monstrosity with bluish, corpulent skin. Its eyes were gone, and its head had this waxy, melted candle aspect that was really evident when you looked at where its eyes should be. And the thing couldn't talk. It could only whimper and mewl, and it smelled absolutely repugnant. But when it came to power, it fought 4 guards at once, killing one, breaking 3 of their arms, and even after the guards had managed to spear it to the ground, it clawed up the spear trying to destroy them until its organs failed. Mishra was very impressed. He told Ashnod, "Make me an army of these transmogrants." Now this is morally repugnant, right? Mishra is showing that he is turning into a harder and worse individual. There is no doubt about it. But at the same time, the Brotherhood of Gix are there in the background. They're excitedly whispering over Ashnod and what she's done. So the question is, how much influence have they had over Mishra at this point? Are they already gaining sway and turning him into a more corrupted individual? Because agreeing to turn humans into these transmogrants is really, really terrible if you get down and think about it. But it does add an epic layer to the story as well. I just can't get over how insane the transmogrants specifically are. Anyhow, it takes another year to refine this process enough to get even a 50% success rate, right? So every second person who undergoes this dies. And this is under these circumstances. So imagine how many people, we're talking thousands of people, whose lives are just gone in this experimentation process. And they get their minds bleached out, their wills bleached out. Ashnod pickles their skin at the same time where they're still alive. It makes them tough and pretty much mindless. Like they can only obey very specific commands they've been trained to obey, and that's it. Now, they're also completely unrecognizable, which is one of the only reasons there wouldn't be riots when the regular everyday Philology see them. Because imagine seeing your own relative turned into one of these shambling horrors. It would be too much for you to bear. So Ashnod ends up creating all of these constructs. Mishra is pleased, and he says, "We're going to use your army of transmogrants to take down Corliss." Now, Ashnod insists on being in control of the army, but Mishra's waving it away at first, letting her have a part of it, but not letting her really have any kind of power, because all of his captains don't really want her in control. They do not believe that women should have power, and specifically, red-haired women are an ill omen. So they're dead set against this. And there's a back and forth that takes a number of exchanges, but ultimately what happens is Ashnod says, if you don't have me in control of these constructs, we can't guarantee that they will actually work. So Mishra relents and makes her a brevet general. If you don't know what brevet means, it's essentially a temporary general. So she's in charge, but she doesn't really get any of the other bonuses of being a general. And if this was a paying military, she wouldn't get paid at that rank either. So it's just a temporary title increase. But he does order all of the captains to follow her orders. Ultimately, she ends up with an army of 300 shambling transmogrants. If you think about how many people's lives were lost to make that, it would be considerable. And they all move in eerie lockstep, complete unison, because they're controlled by one mind. And Ashnod is having her finest day. She leads them atop a giant black stallion, and she is wearing this incredible ornate spiked armor. It's black and red, and it was custom made for her in Zegon. So that's what she's going to wear when they launch the attack on Corliss. But she's been given additional troops. She has infantrymen, cavalrymen, and Mishra had been busy. They had 4 cobbled together dragon engines. Now, these ones were powered by people inside who had to man bellows to create the steam that came out of them, but they were still very powerful. Now, of these 4 cobbled together dragon engines, 2 are actually going to go with the main force in Ashnod. The other 2 are going to be sent as decoys along Care Ridge to distract the Corlissians. When it comes to traveling, the dragon engines are incredibly slow and unwieldy. The only thing slower than them actually happen to be the transmogrants. But the upside for the transmogrants is they never sleep. They are constantly on the move, so they can travel during the night and catch up. The dragon engines basically end up having to be abandoned because once they get about 10 days on their journey to Corliss, they're spotted by an ornithopter from Corliss. And that scout immediately turns around and starts winging it back towards the city. At this point, the element of surprise is lost, so the dragon engines being too slow are left behind. The transmogrants will just continue to do an endless march towards the Corlissians, and they will engage whatever sort of forward troops are sent out to meet them before they arrive at the city. So Ashnod hatches a plan that she is going to essentially hide the transmogrants. So you put a couple lines of infantrymen in the front, you have the transmogrants behind them, and then when the enemy goes to engage those troops, you have the infantry pull back and the transmogrants can step forward and decimate the regular human troops. So this is a pretty clever plan. Unfortunately, as soon as Ashnod actually starts to execute the plan and the transmogrants are revealed, it turns out that the Corlissian troops, which are mostly mercenaries, the Corliss pay mercenaries very well to be their troops, and these mercenaries are well versed in tactics. So it turns out the Corliss mercenaries actually had an identical plan. So their troops split, and behind them step forth both Yoshin soldiers that Urza had built and clay statues that Tanos had built, because Corliss had allied itself with Urza. So now you have these troops from Mishra and these troops from Urza facing off, but you've got a big problem for Ashnod. These transmogrants are great against everyday troops. However, the Yoshin soldiers are more resilient than humans. So when they get their arms torn off or whatever else, they can still keep hacking down the transmogrants, and it takes a lot of damage to tear apart one of these Yoshin soldiers. But the real problem were the clay statues. These things were huge hulking beasts, 3 times as strong as the Yoshin soldiers. Picture a giant muscly dude, but made of clay. He's reaching down, picking up these transmogrants that can't move very quickly, and just tearing them in half. And the inner gore from transmogrants are raining down on these clay statues, but it doesn't mean anything to the statues. They're literally just magic clay. So it sloughs off them like nothing. Even if the transmogrants manage to somehow damage the clay statues are all using their power stones to regenerate. So it is an absolutely one-sided fight. They are outmatched, and a big problem with the transmogrants is they were never taught the concept of retreating. They can't understand it. So they are engaged in battle permanently. And the other Philagi are falling back slowly but surely against the onslaught of these Yoshin soldiers and clay statues, because soldiers' swords cut into a clay statue, boom, it heals up. That's gonna break your spirit. The Philagi are falling back, and so a bubble is forming around Ashnod where basically enemy troops are now on 3 sides of her. And so she makes a signal to the cavalry, but here's where she gets betrayed, because remember how the captains consider her an ill omen and bad luck? They end up abandoning her. They ride off of the field after multiple attempts of her to try and flag them into battle. And as a result, the rest of the troops see the cavalry leaving and they flee too. This leaves just Ashnod and her transmogrants. And she knows the writing's on the wall. The transmogrants can't stand up to these troops. So regretfully, she wheels her horse around and flees back to the dragon engines that were left behind. Lucky for her, they had done enough damage to the troops overall that there was no pursuit except for one ornithopter that trailed them back to Philology lands. Now, Ashnod's transmogrants had been completely wiped out, but on top of that, there had been heavy losses in the footman ranks too. So, Ashnod for show was banished to the nation of Sarenth, and that was done by Mishra to prevent infighting with the captains, because they definitely were clamoring to have Ashnod's life. And Ashnod was also being sent to secure the resources and loyalty of Sarenth at the same time. 2 birds with 1 stone. And she was to do that by force if necessary. After that, the story actually moves over to the city of Teresia. And we're now with Lauren. You may remember her as one of the girls from the original camp of Takasia back at the beginning of the story. She has arrived as Urza's emissary to the city of Teresia, and specifically she's headed to the fabled Ivory Towers. This city is in a far-flung part of Dominaria, and it's where you will find the smartest scholars in existence. This is where Lauren met Felden for the first time, a man with an incredible rune-carved cane he had found frozen in a glacier. He was a scholar of ancient languages. And he wasn't the only famous scholar here. Drafna and Herkel were also there. They were the founders of the College of Latnam. They were both bald. He was short and fat. She was graceful and covered in tattoos. Lauren had come for 2 reasons. She had come at the invitation of the Archmandrite, the leader of the scholars, but also she had come on Urza's behalf. Lauren was now an expert on artifacts. Lauren was ushered into a meeting with the Archmandrite along with the scholars that I've just mentioned, and they start to converse. Ultimately, it becomes clear that the scholars are trying to feel out the brothers. So they're questioning Lauren because they're worried about the spreading war. More and more nations are being conquered. They know what just happened to Sarenth, and they're very fearful over the loss of scholars and books and knowledge. They need to be preserved. Ultimately, the scholars feel like they can't ally with either brother. Felden is insistent that they have to find a third path, but Drafna wants none of it. He bellows, "We're not even going to be involved in this. Latnam is far from these desert squabbles." At which point Herkel let out a little cough, and Drafna changed his tune a little. "I meant to say we will see." Another throat clearing from Herkel, and Drafna scowled. "We will aid you despite my concerns." I love the interplay between these two. Herkel is perfectly content to let Drafna take most of the attention and do most of the talking, but ultimately he will defer to her. I love their relationship. After discussing the situation of the brothers for a while, they ask Lauren if she is willing to abandon Urza and join with them instead. And Lauren spends time pondering. Lauren takes their request seriously. She thinks of her ravaged homelands and what the brothers have done, and ultimately, is this what Takasia would want for them? Lauren made up her mind and decided that she would serve neither brother. And so, the smartest minds on Dominaria set to deciding what would be done about the growing menace of the Brothers' War. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this installment of the story. If you like what we're doing here, then you can join our channel membership or our Patreon to support our work. Thanks for coming by, and I will see you all for the next fun installment. In the meantime, go enjoy some more lore, because remember, my friends, lore is life.